So we are on to chapter 19, which is called The Tax and the British Ultimatum. There's the picture. The tax, as all students of American history know, is the most unpopular tax in the history of New York City. It caused revolution in the city schools and almost brought England into the war. The citizens of New York protested at once that the tax was undemocratic. They said it discriminated unfairly against the users of tacks, as opposed to the users of screws or nails, bolts, and pins. Users of screws, nails, bolts, and pins, and that took in nearly every household in the city, objected as strongly to the tax as the tax users did. Their argument, those who did not use tax, was that if the mayor and city council could put a whopping tax on tax, there was nothing to keep them from putting a whopping tax on screws, nails, bolts, and pins at a later time if they should so choose. The pushcart peddlers had no special interest in tax, as they relied exclusively on pins for the manufacture of their ammunition. However, they supported the protest against the tax as a matter of principle. Mr. Jerusalem risked arrest by giving away boxes of tacks to his customers rather than charge the hated tax. He was picked up by the P-tax squad, but the police commissioner refused to jail him on the grounds that the council ruling put a tax only on tacks that were sold, and since he was giving them away, that was his own business. Teachers were among the hardest hit by the tax, and they were on strike in protest. You could not have a bulletin board without tax, they claimed, and you could not run a New York City classroom without a bulletin board, they said, or things would go hopelessly out of hand. 12,000 teachers carrying "No tax, no teachers" signs picketed Mayor Cudd's office. And while they were picketing, the city schools had to be closed down. With the city schools closed, children of school age were on the streets from morning until night, and the shooting of trucks increased accordingly. As many of the children had been making their P-tax with pins all along and not tacks, for they couldn't see it made any difference, the tax didn't bother them at all. The strongest objection to the tax naturally came from England, who was at the time the world's largest producer of tacks. Most of the tax used in New York City, most of the tax used in New York City came from England. England charged that the New York City tax was designed to cut England out of the American tax market and was, in fact, a violation of Section 238 of the British-American International Tax Agreement. The British ambassador protested in the strongest of terms to the President of the United States in Washington, and suggested that his country might have to intervene directly in fighting in New York if the tax was not repealed at once. The president promptly acted. He called Mayor Cudd, that looks like probably the ambassador from Britain, England. The president acted promptly. He called Mayor Cudd to the White House and warned him that unless the tax law was repealed within 24 hours, he would have to send federal troops. He would have to send federal troops in to keep order in the city. Mayor Cudd had to ask the city council to repeal the tax he had asked them to put in place only a week before. The lifting of the tax was celebrated by the wildest spree of tax buying in the history of the city. Over 800,000 pounds of tax were sold on the first day after the repeal. The mayor, in alarm, hastily improvised the P blockade in hopes of averting a mass outbreak in pea shooting. Sorry about the cats in the background. They maybe got into some catnip. They're a little energetic. Chapter 20. The Pea Blockade. Now, on the morning of May 11th, the mayor issued an emergency order prohibiting the sale of dried peas in New York City until peace in the streets could be restored. No peace, no peas, said the mayor in an address to the city, explaining the reasons for his action. The city council, the mayor told the people, had contracted with Big Mo for 19 mighty mammoths to blockade all bridges and tunnels leading into New York. Mammoth drivers had been instructed to search all incoming trucks for shipments of peas. And furthermore, announced the mayor, I have ordered the pea tax squad to close all pea packaging plants to the city until further notice. It was the pea blockade and the closing of all the pea packaging plants that led to the discovery of the Pushcart conspiracy, although the discovery was the purest sort of accident. Now, all of the pea packagers in the city objected to the shutdown order, but the pea tax squad on the whole handled matters rather tactfully. See, the squad pointed out to the pea packagers that, in the first place, the pea packagers could not get any peas to package while the pea blockade was in effect, and that, in the second place, they could not get any trucks to deliver their packaged peas until there was order and law in the streets again. Since this was true for most of the packagers, some of them grumbling a little and some of them grumbling a lot, they did as they were ordered. They dismissed their workers and locked up their plants. Now, on the whole, the pea blockade went smoothly until the pea tax squad arrived at Posey's plant. Mr. P. Posey of Posey's Peas, ounce by ounce, by the pound, by the ton, as they used to say, did not give up so easily. Although Mr. Posey had advertised his peas by the ounce, by the pound, by the ton for 31 years, he had never had an order for 1 ton of peas until that spring of the Pushcart War. Most of his business was going by the pound. Mr. Posey's biggest order in the pre-war days had been a 300-pound order from a church that was having a baked pea barbecue. Ever since the 1-ton order, Mr. Posey had had big ideas. He was full of plans for expanding his business, and naturally, he did not want to close down his plant just as his advertising was beginning to pay off. With the profits from his 1-ton order, Mr. Posey had laid in a large supply of peas that would be enough to last through the long blockade. Moreover, he did not use trucks to deliver his packaged peas. Mr. Posey was an old-fashioned sort of pea merchant, and he had his peas delivered by pushcart. He had found that the pushcarts could get through the crowded streets more easily, and often faster than the trucks. Also, their charges for delivery were less. The 1-ton order had been delivered in 2,100-pound sacks by 4 pushcarters. So, with a good supply of peas in his plant and no need for trucks to deliver them, Mr. Posey saw no reason at all to close up his plant. Most of his business was... There's the blockade. They're blocking the bridge to make sure no peas come in from another state. Most of his business was with small restaurants that like pea soup. Most of his business was with small restaurants that liked pea soup and he could not see that pea soup had anything to do with a war in the streets. "This is a peaceful pea plant," Mr. Posey said to Mrs. Posey, who had helped him in the business, "and nobody is going to shut us down without a fight." Maybe one more chapter. Chapter 22, The Barricade at Posey's Plant. When the pea tax squad arrived at Posey's plant on the second morning of the pea blockade, they found the doors barricaded with 100-pound sacks of dried peas. "Listen here, open up," ordered the chief of the pea tax squad, when 6 squad men could not budge the door open. "Mayor's orders," he cried, when he saw Mr. Posey glaring down at him from the second-story window of the plant. "I'm closed today," Mr. Posey called down. "For business reasons. Tell the mayor." "Well, open up, because I have to close you up," said the chief. "Oh, no, I'm very busy right now," said Mr. Posey. The P-TAC squad finally had to call the fire department. Fire engines came roaring down the street, bringing with them a larger and larger crowd. 2 firemen took an axe to Posey's door. When Mr. Posey saw the firemen chopping through his door, he and his wife began bombarding the firemen and the P-TAC squad from the second floor with 10-pound sacks of dried peas. See. They're up there dumping peas on their heads. He and his wife began bombarding the firemen and the P-TAC squad from the second floor with 10-pound sacks of dried peas. 1 fireman and 2 squad members were knocked unconscious, and another squad man slipped on the dried peas that were rolling on the sidewalk and broke his wrist. When the firemen finally broke through the door and began hacking their way through 100-pound sacks of peas that Mr. Posey had stacked on the back side of it, a torrent of peas poured into the streets. Hundreds of children had gathered by now and were excitedly stuffing their pockets with free peas. Now, by the time the squad men had fought their way through the barricade, they were still pretty mad. They seized Mr. Posey and his wife and tied them up. They had to, as the Poseys kept throwing sacks of peas at them. The chief of the P-TAC squad then demanded to know why Mr. Posey had barricaded his door. Well, Mr. Posey, who was close to tears by now, told the truth. He said that he had closed up his place of business because he did not want the P-TAC squad to close it for him. Naturally, this was too simple of an explanation to satisfy the chief of the P-TAC squad. "You manufacturing something illegal in here, maybe?" he asked Mr. Posey. "Some counterfeit money or dynamite?" "Dynamite?" said Mr. Posey scornfully. "If I had dynamite, would I be wasting perfectly good sacks of peas throwing them at you from a second-story window?" "This is a 100% legal pea packaging plant," said Mr. Posey, "and all I have in this place is peas and 5, 10, 25, and 100-pound sacks for packaging them. If you untie me, I will show you what kind of business I run." "We shall see for ourselves," said the chief of the P-TAC squad, and he ordered his 2 men to search Mr. Posey's plant. The squad men searched the plant from top to bottom, and they did not find anything but peas and 5 and 10 and 25 and 100-pound sacks. One of the men suggested to the chief that the sacks of peas might be a hiding place for something else, such as smuggled diamonds. "Diamonds?" said Mr. Posey. "You think we are throwing diamonds out of a second-story window? It's bad enough that we would waste peas." The chief, however, took out a jackknife and cut through a dozen 100-pound sacks of peas. Dried peas cascaded and rolled throughout the room. The pea tax squad found themselves up to their ankles in peas. The chief ordered the squad to sift through the peas until they could be sure that there were no diamonds or packets of diamonds or pearls or gold nuggets or maybe uranium concealed within the bags. The squad men who had suggested the diamonds wished he had kept his mouth shut. And when his men sifted through every bag and found nothing, the chief grew more suspicious. He asked to have Mr. Posey's business records brought to him. It was only after the chief had leafed carefully through every one of Mr. Posey's books, which dated back 31 years, that the chief began to feel just a little bit ashamed. The books showed clearly that the only product Mr. Posey had sold during his long business career was dried peas. Most of the orders the chief saw were for 10 and 25-pound sacks. He also realized that Mr. Posey had to work very hard just to make his small business make a living. He had to work very hard at his small business just to make a living, and that he had made a wreck of Mr. Posey's place of business, all for nothing. Well, the chief was about to close the order books and to apologize to Mr. Posey for causing him so much trouble when his eye fell on Wenda Gambling's order for 1 ton of peas. The chief only noticed the entry because it was such a large number of peas as compared to Mr. Posey's usual orders. "Wenda Gambling? The movie star?" asked the chief. "Well, why not?" said Mrs. Posey. "Posey's peas are a quality product." "But what does a movie star want with a ton of peas?" asked the chief. "How do I know?" said Mr. Posey. "Am I supposed to ask every customer their private business? Maybe she's planting a pea farm for a hobby, or maybe she's starting a pea soup plant." "Or," said the chief, "a pea shooter plant?" "Why not?" said Mr. Posey. "Why not?" agreed the chief. "Well, Mr. Posey, I think we have bothered you long enough." He untied Mr. Posey and his wife and explained to Mr. Posey that even if he was running a 100% legal pea packaging business, he would have to close his plant until the pea blockade was over. "Well, what difference does it make now?" said Mr. Posey. "I could never clean up the mess you've made of my plant in less than a month." "Why not?" shouted the chief suddenly. "Why not? Why not?" "Because it's a mess, that's why. You've ruined all of my peas and all of my product," screamed Mr. Posey. "No, no, 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 no," said the chief. "Never mind the mess. I don't care about that. I mean, why not a pea shooter plant for Wenda Gambling?" "What does Wenda Gambling want with a pea shooter plant?" asked Mr. Posey. "Why not?" the chief said again. "I mean, who knows? Do you have the bill for Miss Wenda Gambling's 1 ton of peas?" "I have a carbon copy," said Mr. Posey. "Let me see it," said the chief. The bill was made out to Miss Wenda Gambling at the Plaza Hotel. However, the chief noticed that the 1 ton of peas had not been delivered to Wenda Gambling's apartment at the Plaza Hotel, but rather to Maxie Hammerman's shop. The chief pointed at Maxie's address. "Aha," he said. "Aha what?" said Mr. Posey. He saw nothing odd about the order. He delivered peas to whatever address the customers gave him. "Maxie Hammerman. That's what, aha," said the chief. "So," said Mr. Posey, "maybe they were a birthday present. Who's Maxie Hammerman?" It happened that the chief of the pea tax squad was one of the few people in all of New York City outside of the pushcart peddlers and Maxie's personal friends, who knew who Maxie was. Maxie Hammerman, said the chief thoughtfully, is the pushcart king.